So today we start a new section of Matthew's Gospel, new brief series, just a couple week series here. Today we begin the fourth of the 5 discourses in Matthew. I've told you before, Matthew has 5 big discourses that kind of break up the narrative in the Gospel of Matthew. And so today we get discourse number 4, the start of discourse number 4, which we typically call the discourse on the church. So it's like Jesus is answering the question, all right, so here's this group of people that have placed their faith in you, right? We've talked about that plenty. And here's these people that have decided to entrust their lives to you. How's that going to work? Like, what do we do there? How's that going to operate? And so it's a really important discourse for us because it gives us clear instructions. Like, okay, as this group of people that's following Jesus, what's going to become pretty important for us? And it should be very telling that some of the first 2 things out of Jesus' mouth, first 2 things that he thinks of, like, oh, this is going to be important for them. First 2 things: reconciliation and forgiveness. Learning to reconcile with one another and learning to forgive one another. Okay, Jesus isn't dumb. I know that you know that. Jesus isn't dumb. He knows that we live in a broken and in a fallen world. And in a broken, fallen world like us, broken by our own sin, broken by darker forces at work, something that we're going to do a lot of is mess up. What are the 2 great commandments? Love God, love your neighbor, right? You think that's always going to happen? No. We're going to mess that one up on the regular. And so Jesus says, all right, guess what? 2 things that you're going to need to get really good at as this group of people following me is reconciling and forgiving. So today Jesus tackles that topic of reconciliation. And next Sunday we'll hear the other part of the discourse talking about this need of forgiveness. And I want you to notice that these are very incredibly relevant topics for us. Very, very relevant, very personal for us. Because first and foremost, there are 2 things that we're typically not very good at. A lot of us are very good German and Irish Americans, which means that the way we typically deal with this is how? Just not going to deal with it. We're just going to avoid it, bury it. Never happened. Move on with my life. Done. Okay, Jesus is saying you can't do that. And it's not just because Jesus said so. He's saying that's not going to go well for you. And actually, it's going to be pretty harmful for you. It's going to be harmful for your relationships. It's going to be harmful for other people. Right? Because when we don't address something, when we don't deal with something, what happens? It just starts to fester. And it starts to eat your lunch. And I know that you know what I'm talking about. And I've faced this before. I've talked to many of you that have faced this before. Many of you didn't talk to me about it, but I'm pretty sure you've been through it too. And I've watched it happen in the parish. And this isn't just like what's Father Michael talking about? No, we've all been through this. We know what we're talking about. So as uncomfortable as it is, I would really encourage you in today, but then next Sunday as well, when these things start to come up that you've been burying for so long, when it starts to come up, don't just bury it again. Begin to pray with it. Right? Begin to ask God, how am I supposed to deal with this? How do I work through this? Begin to beg him and ask him, what's my next step forward? How do we do this? Okay. So today Jesus tackles that topic of reconciliation. We could ask the question this way. Okay. What do you do? What do we do when someone who says that they have faith in Jesus? What do we do in a Christian? What do we do in a Catholic? What do we do in a member of our parish? Okay, a Catholic person. What do we do when they start to live their life in such a way that their words, I believe in Jesus, just really aren't matching with the way that they live their life? What are we supposed to do? In other words, what do we do with hypocrites? What do we do with people that go to Mass every Sunday, but then Monday through Saturday you're like, you're a what? You're a Catholic? You're a Christian? You believe in Jesus? What do we do with those people? What do we do with someone who gives scandal to others? What do we do with people that say, I'm Catholic, and they go around telling everyone, I'm Catholic, I'm Christian, but then they don't live it. They don't go to Mass, they don't pray, they don't follow the teachings of the church, they encourage other people not to follow the teachings of the church. They openly live in situations that are just like, that's not what the church teaches. That's not what God teaches us. But still they go around telling everyone, I believe in Jesus. I'm a Catholic. I'm a Christian. What do you do with that? None of us know anyone like that, I know. What do you do with that? Matthew 18. Jesus tells us. We don't have to go guessing. Jesus tells us what to do. There's 2 ways that we can typically hear what Jesus says to us in our gospel today. Does anyone work in HR? Has anyone ever had to fire somebody? Don't have to raise your hand for that one. Okay, no. So if you have to fire somebody and you don't want to get sued, that's the other caveat. You don't want to get sued after that. What do you have to do? Step number 1, you have to give them a poor performance review. Then you have to start documenting all the ways that they're bad at their job. Then you need to give them an improvement plan. Be like, hey, we need to do these 5 things to get you back on track. And when they inevitably don't follow through on that, you say, hey, sorry, you're fired. Then you don't get sued. It's very easy for us to hear what Jesus is saying in the gospel and kind of see it through that lens. What do we do with a Christian, with a Catholic that's just obstinately sinning and they're just the worst and we just want to get rid of them? Well, go talk to them, then have a couple other people talk to them, then a few more people talk to them, then you can kick them out. You just don't have to worry about them anymore. Nice. Thanks, Jesus. That's not what Jesus is talking about. Okay, think of it a different way. For some of you, this isn't going to be too hard to imagine, but imagine that you have a brother whom you love dearly. He's married, has a couple of kids. Okay, imagine you have this brother who's been struggling with an addiction for a long time, alcohol, drugs, whatever it may be. Okay, he's been struggling with this for a while, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Right, you get calls from your sister-in-law, from his wife, just telling you, this happened, or he lost his job again, or, something happened, and I'm worried about the safety of the kids. I just don't know what's going to happen. It's very unpredictable. Okay. What are you going to do in that situation? You're going to go talk to your brother and be like, dude, we got to figure some things out. We got to get you some help. And if he doesn't listen to you because you're just his dumb brother, you're going to bring a couple of his friends and you can be like, hey, we need to talk to this guy. We need to help him figure his life out. And if that doesn't work, you're going to plan this thing called an intervention. You're going to sneak attack him, bring a whole group of people and say, hey, we need you to go get some help because we love you and we want what's best for you. We want what's best for your family and for your marriage. See how there's a little bit of a difference? It's only then that if your brother is still being an idiot and says, nope, doing none of that, that's when you start talking to your sister-in-law and saying, hey, you might want to think about taking the kids because I don't know if it's going to be safe for you guys to be there. That's when that happens. Another situation, it's your brother whom you love dearly, married, couple of kids. What happens when you find out that your brother's stepping out on his wife? You go talk to him and you're like, dude, what the heck is going on? If he doesn't listen to you, you bring a couple of his friends and you're like, dude, you got to cut this out. What are you doing? We're going to have to tell your wife. What's going on? You go to him and you're like, we got to fix this. We got to fix this situation. So again, this is what's going on with Jesus. When we talk about what's Jesus talking about in the gospel today, it's a very different way of looking at it. In the first case, I just want to get rid of this guy. How do we fire him? How do we get him out of here, Jesus? In the other case, it's, Jesus, I've got this brother of mine, I got this friend of mine that's really struggling. What do I do with him? When it comes to the addict, when it comes to that, it's like just a no-brainer. We're going to do whatever it takes to help him. We're going to do whatever it takes to help place our nieces and nephews back in safety. I'll do whatever it takes. With the person that's being unfaithful, you don't just walk up to him and pat him on the back and say, hey man, none of us are perfect. It's all right. Nobody does that, I hope. No. So you see what I'm saying? You with me? When we hear this teaching of Jesus, we got to make sure that we hear it this second way. Jesus is not trying to help us get rid of annoying people. He's trying to say, how do we bring others back into the fold? And we know this because what happens right before this in the gospel, it's right before this passage, literally just 2 verses before. Jesus tells a very famous parable that you're very familiar with. It goes like this. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, will he not leave the 99 in search of the one? In just the same way, it is not the will of the Father that one of these little ones be lost. So when Jesus starts talking about this process of reconciliation, he's not just randomly saying something. He just talked about what happens when people go astray. What do? We go after them because they're that important. They're that valuable. He even says in the gospel, if you go and talk to your brother and he listens to you, you've won your brother back. That word just means saved. Like you've saved your brother. It's a good thing. It's a great thing to do. The purpose isn't to kick him out, it's to win him back. This person is so valuable that you go in search of them. And if that doesn't work, you take a couple other people and you're like, we got to get this guy. If that doesn't work, you say, hey, everybody, after Mass, we're going. We got to go get this guy. Why? Because they're that important. Because that's love. Why? That's why they're so worth it. We really care about them. And we're not just going to pretend everything's okay. We're going to say, no, we got to go after this person. We got to get him back. The flip side of this, it's actually a little bit rough, which is why we don't like listening to the first reading. But the flip side of this is that it isn't just a them problem. It's an us problem. Why do we typically not do this? Why do we typically overlook things? Why do we let so much slide? It's because, I know this is uncomfortable to hear, it's because deep down, we don't actually care about them. We don't actually love them. Or we don't actually think what they're doing is that wrong. Okay, and that's when it becomes not just a them problem. That's when it becomes an us problem. It becomes very dangerous for us as well. If you're paying attention to our first reading, God told Ezekiel, he says, if you don't go out and dissuade and speak out to dissuade the wicked from their ways, the wicked shall die for his guilt. Like, they're guilty. If they got a problem and they're doing, that's a them problem. But what? But I'm going to hold you responsible for their death. I go back to the example. If your brother has an addiction and you do nothing, and then he, hurts his kids or whatever like that, yeah, he's going to go to jail. He's guilty. It's a him problem. But that's also a you problem because you didn't do anything to stop it. If your brother's stepping out on his wife, and you say nothing, you pat him on the back and say, yeah, nobody's perfect, man. That's not just a him problem anymore. That's a you problem. Right? If this is what's going on, this is what Jesus is saying. You got to step in. Have you ever heard of I think I've said this before, have you ever heard of the magician, what's his name? Penn Teller? Is that it? Penn and Teller? No. What's his first guy's name? What's his first name? Mr. Penn, whatever his first name is. He's an atheist. But after one of his shows, a guy came up to him and just was telling him how much he loves his magic and his comedy and all that stuff. And then he just simply shares, hey, and I just want to let you know I believe in Jesus and I'm a Christian. I want to just give you this little Bible and tell you, I know you're an atheist, but I think it's very important that each and every person follow Jesus Christ. And later on, Penn was saying, I'm still an atheist. That guy didn't convince me of anything. But I appreciate what he did because if he actually believes what he says that he believes, then to not tell me how important Jesus is, to just kind of leave me in the dark, how much would someone have to hate someone not to tell them about Christ? Like if he says there's a heaven and there's a hell, if there's a right and there's a wrong, how much would you have to hate somebody to say, I'm not going to tell them what they're doing is wrong? What he said is, it's like if a semi-truck is coming down the road and is about to hit somebody, and you're just like, nice. It's like, you're going to push that person out of the way. That's what our readings are getting at. Right? Not going after the lost sheep is not an option. We can't just say, no, I'm not going to do it. No, it's not an option. It's not. You're all good people. I know you're all good people. Very good, very loving people. I have no doubt of that. If your brother had a problem, I know that you would go talk to them. Why? Because you love your brother. If your brother had another problem, I know that you'd go and talk to him about that problem too. Why? Because you love your brother. But then something happens when it comes to our faith, when it comes to following Christ, and we say, it's not that big of a deal. In our faith, what we do is we make a covenantal relationship with God. Okay, in our baptism, when we receive communion, we enter into this covenantal relationship with God and with each other. The covenantal relationship we're mostly familiar with is marriage. Okay, so we enter into that type of a relationship with God and with his people. So it's like saying, when I'm a Catholic, I'm a Christian, I'm not just saying, I believe in God. What we've been talking about for several weeks is, I've entrusted my life to him. I've made this covenant with him, which means now I'm going to be faithful to God and to his people in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. I will love God. I will love my brothers and sisters. I will love them and honor them all the days of my life. That's the kind of thing that we're doing here. That's what Scripture points out time and time again. So when someone says, I have faith in Jesus, I'm a Catholic. When a member of our parish, what do you do when they're living their life in such a way that it's just not matching up with that covenant that they've entered into? What do you do when the person's living contrary to the teachings of God, to the teachings of the church? What do you do when they're not going to Mass and they're encouraging other people not to follow the teachings of the church? Whatever it may be, Jesus' instructions are very clear. We got to go after them. Not to shame them, not to yell at them, not to tell them, you're probably going to hell. No, it's to bring them back because we love them and we want what is best for them. People say being a Christian means to love God, love your neighbor. That was in our second reading. Love your neighbor. They make t-shirts. I'll buy you one. Right? Love God, love your neighbor. Great, true, awesome. But then we get to the readings today and we find out that true love is actually difficult. It's actually a little bit difficult. And to love your neighbor means to go after them even when they're lost. To go after them and to point out their sin to them even. And to help bring them back. Jesus' words, they're not a way for us to feel better about kicking somebody out and saying, finally, don't have to deal with them no more. Jesus' words are a challenge to us to go after those lost sheep and to reconcile them back to his fold. Why? Because we love them. Because they're valuable to us. Because they're valuable to God. They matter. Just like that little verse before the gospel said, God reconciled the world to himself. That's what Jesus did. But 2 Corinthians 5, what does he say? And now he's entrusted this message of reconciliation to us. He's given this work to us to bring others back into the fold. So yeah, being a good Christian, being a good Catholic, love God, love your neighbor, 100% true. But do you love your brother enough to go after him and to bring him back? Do you love them enough to call them out on their sin? Do you love them enough to go and to bring them back into God's fold?